Hey guys, how's it going? Preparing here. So, as some of you know, probably most of you by now, I did enjoy Grim Dawn on my second round, let's just call it. A little bit more than I first let on. I pretty much played the game in the background, played it while I was playing Hearthstone, played it in my spare time a little bit, got a pretty badass character. It's pretty much completely maxed out at this point, and well, the game is really fun, and as it goes, you know, it's a small company that makes the game. I thought I'd give it pretty much the PoE treatment, I guess. You know, something I enjoyed, something that's small, something that people should know about. It's not quite on the same level as PoE yet, but, you know, there's a lot of stuff that they're doing, and I hope it'll improve. However, I did manage to talk to the lead developer, Bruno, and in this video, while I know the audio quality is pretty terrible, I apologize for that. I've never done these before. So if you are interested in what he has to say, how the game is going, all the rest, check it out. I'll include some links about the game if you're still curious. And, well, yeah, I think it's important that you guys know that I did this just because I really like the game. And hopefully, if you guys decide to try it, you guys will too. Hey Arthur, I know you're a big guy at the Grim Dawn area of things. I don't know too much about the company. I don't know the administrative end. I don't know any of that. I just play the game. So I was curious, what part are you of Grim Dawn, and what kind of team do you guys have over there?
Well, we're pretty small, kind of fly by the seat of our pants company. I mean, basically, after I worked at Iron Lore Entertainment as the lead gameplay designer on Titan Quest, and then as the lead designer on a new project when the company closed. And afterwards, I basically just didn't really have a lot of enthusiasm about going back to work for another big company. Not that Iron Lore was that big, but you know, so I tried to figure out what I could do on my own, and it started off as a very kind of, I guess, amateur-esque sort of thing. I mean, I had a lot of development experience, but no experience running a company. So I did a couple of things for the first few years. I did like some contract work for another studio with a couple of other Iron Lore guys, and then eventually we tried to pitch some projects to publishers, but this was back around 2008 and 9 when the market was tanking in the U.S., and it was very difficult to get money to do anything because everybody was afraid of the financial crisis. So I was pretty much ready to throw in the towel, and as a last effort, I started thinking, like, is there anything I could do on my own or with just a small group of people? And about the same time, the previous owners of Iron Lore had kind of moved on to other things, and so all of the code base that they owned from Titan Quest was just sitting around doing nothing. So I worked out a back-end deal with them to license that code, and that enabled us basically to start working on an action RPG without any programmers initially.
Yeah, I have heard that a lot of the game comes from Titan Quest, and I knew the engine was from Titan Quest, but I was watching like some videos about Titan Quest because everyone's telling me to play it, and it looked a lot more rough than Grim Dawn does.
Well, I'm glad some improvements are obvious that we've made over the years. I mean, it's kind of funny because like a lot of people will say the game looks a lot like Titan Quest, and I mean, obviously it does. Everything sort of by default, you know, went back to Titan Quest until we put in time to change it. But I think we have done a lot over the years. I mean, we've added post-processing effects, specular terrain, a rotatable camera, depth of field, hit reactions, hit effects, effects on enemies, and then, you know, quest choices. I mean, there's I think a lot of stuff that's advanced beyond Titan Quest, and we still have plans to unroll a couple of big systems, but yeah, I mean, initially what we started with was the Titan Quest code, and initially it was just me and an artist, and so I've basically been managing all of the business end stuff as I figure out how to do it, and then basically in all the rest of my time doing design work and whatever else needed to be done. And eventually we picked up a programmer, and then we got some other people volunteering. And finally, and I guess it was 2012, we did the Kickstarter, and I was able to hire up a team of full-time guys. And since then, we've grown to 8 people. We have, I guess, 8 people now, picked up 2 over the last few months. So progress was really slow early on, but I mean, it's been, I think, accelerating to some extent. But, still, we're a very small team.
I think I heard about the game originally from the Kickstarter a bit over a year ago, and I think you actually sent me an email to try it or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but whatever the case, I tried it. I thought the game was pretty good. I got to max level, I had a pretty decked out character, and I was still pretty addicted to the game, but I couldn't really find anything else to do. And recently, people were telling me that it's on sale on Steam, so I'm like, whoa, is this game finished or whatever? Soon found out it wasn't exactly, but I tried it again. I got a bit bored after a couple of days, but on my off time here and there, I keep playing. I started playing it with other games at the same time, and I'm like, it's like crushingly addictive, and I can't really pinpoint anything about the game that I like more than any other specifically, but it's so addicting. One thing that I haven't seen in the other games that I've played is like the proc system, like proc attacks, procs on weapons, and just procs on everything. And it's all like really kind of cool because you're kind of like programming a character to do stuff automatically, which is really, really neat. And I've seen a little bit of that in other RPGs, but not quite to this extent. So I don't know if it's really that or something I can't notice, but I'm quite pleased with the game overall. I was just disappointed to see that, at least in my opinion, not that much has changed in about a year. And I was curious how happy you are with, let's say a year from now, and kind of how you feel that things are going for the future.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm happy with the fact that the game's so addictive. I mean, ultimately, I think if we had finished the game by now, but it was not very addictive or fun to play, then I think we'd have a much bigger problem than where we are now, where it seems like people are really digging the game, but obviously we have work to do. And part of it is that when we started this, our ambitions for the game were much smaller. I mean, there were no other action RPGs in development that we knew. I mean, there were some in development, but none that we knew about when I started the project. So the idea was just kind of like, hey, there's a lot of people who want another action RPG. With this code base, we could put something out, and, it'd be kind of rough and small, but it'd be better than nothing, basically. And over that time, just a huge amount of competition has emerged. I mean, there's more great action RPGs out now than there's ever been in history. Yeah. So the bar is really high, and we've had to spend a lot of time trying to kind of go back and rework stuff and, make sure that what we're producing is up to that level of competition. So, I mean, that's where we've put in, spent time putting in a lot of kind of the extra gameplay systems, like the quest choices and, various other things to help differentiate ourselves. Probably within the next month, we're going to be rolling out a new thing called skill transmuters that are basically like these little branching side skills that will change up the way a lot of the skills work, and I think open up a lot of interesting new build possibilities. And then we've got some other stuff beyond that.
I heard a lot of those skill changes change like the damage type of a certain skill or something of that order. And ultimately what I think that does is, it utilizes these items like, vitality damage crossbows or something like that. Like, I just see so many of these strange stats that don't seem to have any place.
Yeah. Well, part of it also is that we plan to add in additional classes in the game are kind of intended to be more utilized by future classes, and so right now they're a little peripheral. But I mean, also, go on.
Sorry to interrupt. I heard that there's going to be the Arcanist Class. Is that the last on the list?
Yeah, we're thinking that we're probably going to release with 5, and then we'll add in additional classes through expansions. Like, we've already been kind of tinkering around with like a necromancer class, and we want to do something that's more focused around the two-handed weapons.
Mm-hmm. And more about this stuff. what things are, like the big things at least, so people can get maybe a bit excited? What things are still on the list until you guys consider the game complete, like for launch? Like what is the game finished in your mind like?
Well, so basically up until about February, mostly we were working on getting Act 2 out. And then with the release of Act 2, we also put out a veteran mode, which is, the other selectable difficulty at start, and then two-handed weapons. So that's kind of preoccupied us for a lot of the last several months. And then the programming team has been working on additional features and also largely multiplayer. We're expecting multiplayer will probably roll out within the next few weeks, along with the skill transmuters. And then beyond that, we got to finish up Arcanist. I think that's coming along pretty well. I'd expect that to be done maybe by end of August, end of September, sometime probably within the next two and a half months. And then beyond that, it's mainly just finishing up Act 3. And then if we can, and we have a lot of different sort of story ideas and environments that we have, sort of prototyped and now need to just kind of fit together. And depending on how we piece that stuff out, how big it becomes, it might end up with sort of a small Act 4 at the end. So I think the goal is basically by sometime early next year to have Act 3 out, and then, with multiplayer and Arcanist and additional system that we haven't, gameplay system that we haven't really talked much about yet. That'll probably wrap up the initial game.
Now, what is multiplayer going to be like? I played the game single player because that's the only way to play it, and there's like some cool stuff that you wonder if this was in a multiplayer environment, if it would actually function properly, and those kinds of things have a lot of concerns in my mind. For instance, like one of my first characters was I think it's called a Blackwater cocktail or something like that. And I know when monsters shoot a projectile and you're launching the cocktail, the projectile like preemptively pops your cocktail or something. Like, I'm not imagining that, am I?
No, yeah. I mean, there's basically the way the physics work is if projectiles collide, they can blow each other up.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this seems like a mess to figure out in a multiplayer environment. What kind of compromises do you guys think you guys are going to have to make for that to work smoothly?
Well, I mean, players' projectiles won't collide with one another, so I think that alleviates a huge potential problem there, and then beyond that, it won't be that much different than, it is in single player. And it's one of those features where I think some people find it annoying, other people love it. To me, I think it just adds a little extra element of skill and timing where you have to kind of, strafe fire in order to avoid, or sort of time, the projectile throw.
The latency adjustments.
And just pretty much, anything you can do to help balance out, sort of the power difference between ranged and melee characters, which is always a struggle in action RPG.
Mm-hmm. How would the multiplayer work exactly, just to wrap this one up? Would it be like you guys host servers, or would it be like a person hosts a server and invites their friends to join them?
It'll be more like the latter. Basically, we're going to initially be using Steam matchmaking. So you'll have, go onto a server browser, see a list of games that people are hosting, or host a game yourself, and then various other people can join it. And it sort of depends. Things could evolve from there depending on how successful the game is. If Grim Dawn was profitable enough, we could potentially look into setting up our own servers, and then there's the more sort of remote possibility that we might be able to go back and re-architect it for closed multiplayer. But and I know that's something that's very important to a certain portion of the multiplayer audience, and we'd love to do it, but it's one of those things where we're an 8-person team, and the original game wasn't architected for that, so it's a huge investment.
And one of my main concerns is, again, the game is still very addictive right now, but usually when I look at a game, I can somehow understand fairly well if I will enjoy it based on what there is to do in the end game. And right now, I've done it, I'm still doing it. it hasn't gotten to the point where it's boring yet, but I'm sure, you know, given enough time, given enough Steps of Torment runs, I'll decide, you know, pretty much have done everything again. So my question is the Steps of Torment model, which, you know, it's a roguelike dungeon, I feel is pretty cool. Is that pretty much going to be the end game in the game, like where there's a zone you can try once and the monsters are way too many levels above you for you know, you to do it on your first try?
There will be additional roguelike dungeons later on in the game in Act 3, but there are sort of additional things planned, like other high-level challenging areas that you don't necessarily have to farm a key for, some of which will be a little bit more open and randomized than others. Not necessarily in terms of like a fully randomized level, but where like the content within them and the monster placement and where the entrance and exits are will be relatively randomized. So, you know, and I mean, beyond that, I mean, basically, you know, this is... I mean, I was actually watching some of your videos where you're playing, and I was kind of cringing a little bit because when Build 19 went out, we had just undertaken some combat formula changes that were necessary to fix some damage scaling problems that we're going to present after we increased the level cap. And it inadvertently nerfed a lot of the higher level monsters. So, like, I'm watching some of your videos running around, you're barely taking any damage. And my guess is that probably significantly diminishes the fun of the game, where you sort of run into certain enemies that weren't affected by that change, who occasionally present some difficulty, but like the general enemies that are doing physical damage, you know, are just not that challenging. So I think basically, I mean, a big part of it is fine-tuning the balance. I mean, we're still in the middle of development, and that's also part of the reason development is slow is, I mean, this is the first time I've worked on a game where the public is playing it while we're developing it, and it presents a lot of unique challenges where you have to kind of keep going back and trying to rebalance things and keep it playable, but at the same time, you don't want to spend too much time fine-tuning because you do have to get content out. So I think basically, you know, fine-tuning the balance, adding in the additional difficulties, because I mean, this is, even if you're playing on veteran, I mean, it's the first difficulty. And then getting out Act 3, which will have more of those kind of high-level end areas for people to play around in, I think will add a lot of longevity.
This is one of the first RPG games that I found that really rewards damage but doesn't require it. So a lot of the stuff in Steps of Torment felt really difficult when I was like on a very tanky character, because, you know, you have to mess around with the CC and stuff like that. But then, you know, you make a character that's just like a cannon, and, you know, you run into all the high priority targets and just kill them really quickly. And it's probably largely a circumstance of only some of the monsters are queuing properly, like you said. But it does feel, you know, pretty cool where you move around all the crappy monsters to get to the ones that you know will kill you, and you kill them before they get a chance to really react in an unfavorable way.
Yeah, I mean, like the Nightblade class is especially designed to sort of work that way, where you have a lot of really high damage active skills that you can basically allow you to get to enemies quickly and take out the most threatening mobs so that you're not taking too much damage. And so in that way, you know, offense is kind of the Nightblade's best defense. But I mean, yeah, the way it is now, like some of the skills on that mastery, I think definitely need some fine tuning. So it should still play like that, but maybe not quite as much to the extent that it does right now.
Yeah. I was actually looking at other builds and stuff, going through the build calcs and all that. You know, I haven't rolled everything in the game, but I've rolled like the Blackwater cocktail thing, which is like a demolitionist type of build, and it used to be better than it is now, a year ago that is, at least it felt that way. And I did the soldier thing where you get all tanky, you blitz through stuff and you force wave stuff and you do all that. And then I did the Nightblade, and I tried like a summoner for a brief period, and it seemed like all the spells and all like the minions, they weren't really very effective, and they all cost like way too much energy. And then I had to put points into Spirit, which gives you mana and gives you spell damage. But you'd still need points in Cunning to actually hit the targets, and you'd still need points in Physique to wear gear. So it felt to me like the casters were really underwhelming, and it felt to me like the primary stat spirit was also by far the most underwhelming. How do you guys feel about that?
No, I mean, I think that's fairly true. And that should change a bit in the next build. I mean, both with certain some gear rebalancing that we've done, but also the Occultist class has gotten boost to a lot of its skills.
Are you guys going to have any type of like pet scaling? Because I feel like the gear scales so well for some of these melee classes. You know, you have plus the damage, then you have damage percent, which multiplies that, and you have attack speed percent, which multiplies that, and you can scale that through your cunning, for instance, by critting more, for hitting more, and then you're an occultist. You can't really spec too much into that, and you have like your pets, but the pets all have like linear scaling. There's like pet damage and like pet speed, I think, but the pet speed seemed to me that it's at the mercy of your pet's AI, which seemed about as good as the monster's AI.
Yeah, and sometimes worse. I mean, pet AI is actually just one of those things that I keep thinking is someday when we have some programmer time, we need to go back and tune that up a bit. But the pets actually do have sort of their own scaling. Like enemies, they basically get stat bonuses with every level, and so basically every time your character level goes up, your pets become stronger, and then there are additional skills that further augment them, and then you can collect items that have pet bonuses, and I don't know. I think maybe we potentially need to do more of that. I mean, I guess we'll have to see how pets are scaling after we increase the level cap. They actually they will be buffed up a little bit in build 20.
Also had a bit of a concern with resists, and resists, again, they seem like they work a certain way. Actually, there's a few that I don't really understand. Maybe you know this, and maybe it's on a forum already, so I apologize if it is. But things like freeze resistance makes sense because it reduces the amount of time you're frozen. But I don't know how stun resistance works or how slow resistance works. Do they reduce the duration of the stun, or do they have a factor to remove the chance of being stunned or being ensnared? How do those work?
So basically, I mean, stun works similar to freeze, where the higher your resistance is, it basically decreases the duration by that percentage. Although we do have, occasionally items will have something like, X% chance of 100% stun resist, and basically that means that you have, say it's a 10% chance that when you get stunned, there's a 10% chance that it'll just be completely resisted and you won't be stunned at all. Mm-hmm. With the slow movement, to be honest, I'd have to go have a programmer check the code, but my assumption is that it will reduce the speed by which you're slowed instead of the duration in that case.
Yeah, that was one of the most frustrating things when I first did Steps of Torment on a tanky character, is that I would just be slowed the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally as designers we get carried away, trying to mess with the player, and so sometimes you have to go back and watch videos of people playing or play it yourself, and then you kind of realize there's just too much slow or stun or trap in this area. I mean, part of it happens because you're working on specific mobs or heroes or something, and then later you go back and realize that collectively when you get all these different enemies together, it's just too much, and it's it's annoying.
Also with resists, I was curious, it seems intentional that vitality is pretty rare, and then you have the ultra rare, which is ether and chaos. And I know there's ether monsters, but they're not really that powerful from what it's the warden and a few of the things around them. And chaos, I just have no idea. How do these get played in, and why are they so rare on items? Is that really that intentional?
Yeah, I mean, I guess our original thinking was that we wanted... So Ether is mainly tied to the ethereal enemies, and then Chaos is primarily found on the chthonic enemies, like those in Depraved Sanctuary. And you'll be seeing more of those in Act 3. But our idea was to try to make those two damage types feel a little bit more exotic. And also, we wanted to ensure that those specific enemy types in the endgame remained relatively threatening.
Mm-hmm. Now, my concern wouldn't really be a big one if resists had some kind of non-linear scaling. But with resists, they're in the traditional sense where, right now you have the cap of 80, and if you're at 75, going from 75 to 80 is a 20%, damage mitigation. So when I have like 12 chaos resists, I'm not really that motivated to get another 10. And because it's so difficult to get it anywhere near 80, it just becomes one of those complete write-offs. So do you guys have any plan to fix that, or do you really want it to be like very, very exotic?
I mean, honestly, to some extent, it's kind of funny because, we're here working on the game and, adding all this stuff to the database, but collectively you end up with so much data that eventually it will get to the point that players are sort of more familiar with how that data plays out in the game than you are. So some of these things are maybe intentional to some degree, but not, but maybe too far of an extent. And in that case, we have to kind of look at player feedback and see how that's playing out in the game. And then, at some point we may determine that, hey, it's too hard to get these damage types. I think people will be more incentivized to collect them in certain higher level areas. Like in Act 3, one of the sort of endgame places we're planning is for people to be able to actually enter the chthonic void, which is like the underworld that these chthonic demons are coming from. And of course, that'll be a very challenging area has a lot of high chaos damage. And so, in order to sort of prepare to go in there, you'd probably want to try to figure out how to up that resistance.
Yeah.
But I think that when we get to that point, if we find that it's just too hard for people to reasonably do that, then obviously we've got to make some changes, increase the amounts on items or the number of items you can get it on.
Yeah, it just feels like a lot of the resistance accumulation is gradual through like enchants and that kind of stuff in general. Obviously on gear, like chaos and I think chaos and ether only show up on blue quality gear, while there are some green affixes that show vitality, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And all the other resists are covered by yellow gear from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So that's where the rarity comes from. But you can kind of make up for it. It just feels that because having a resist at like 20 doesn't really do anything. To get ether to 20, you can instead probably up your life by 10%, for instance. So it just feels like one of those things that's, a bit too out of the way unless you have to get it. So, if you have to get it, it should be pretty interesting. But are you kind of happy with that model? With like an all or nothing in resists, so you have clear strengths and clear weaknesses? Or, I understand it may not be by design, but what do you think of how it's going so far?
I guess actually one of my biggest concerns in terms of the way things are balanced so far, which we've addressed a little bit in Build 20, but we'll probably do more so in the future, is just the fact that I think people accumulate a lot of resist kind of inadvertently. It seems like right now it's very easy to cap out like the elemental resists, by 35, which is, kind of like middle of normal difficulty. And it seems like it should be a little bit more difficult, or that people should at least be making more of an effort in order to accomplish that. Mm-hmm. Right now, I feel like there's just resistances are kind of given out a little bit too freely on as kind of like peripheral bonuses on certain items.
Yeah.
So, like, I was kind of doing a review of a lot of the epic items or rare affixes the other day, and noticing that there's quite a lot of them that provide pretty decent offensive bonuses, and then they'll just also have a pretty good quantity of resist on them. And to me, I feel like it would be more interesting if if things were sort of skewed towards the end of the spectrum where you had to make a bit more of a decision in terms of applying an offensive or a defensive piece of gear, as opposed to just kind of always accumulating both on every piece.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that turns out. In terms of armor, though, again, I'm sure this information is somewhere, but I haven't taken too much of an effort to check. I am still pretty curious how armor plays into the game. I know each of your slots has an armor value, and when a monster hits you, it has a chance to attack each of those pieces individually, and they receive a bonus from the armors from like your belt, or skills, or enchants, or something like that. And they receive a bonus from like armor percent, which I think works the same way as a bonus from your belt. And there's this other stat that's armor absorption increase, which I'm not really sure what that does, and I'm not really sure how armor works with attacks in general. You mind giving a quick overview of that if you're fully aware?
Yeah, sure. This is actually kind of like a weird legacy thing that goes back to Titan Quest, where when I originally designed armor, I had just come off playing, I think it was like Dark Age of Camelot, where the armor had basically like a protection value and some absorption percentage, and like I thought that was pretty cool because it helped differentiate like heavy and light armors, where and I don't remember exactly how it worked in that game, but the way that it worked in Titan Quest and still works in Grim Dawn is that essentially there's a protection value, which is like the amount of damage that the armor covers you for, and then the absorption is the degree, the percent by which that damage is reduced. So like if you have a piece of armor that has 50 protection and there's a universal absorption, I think it's set to like 70% right now. Mm-hmm. So basically up to 50 damage, it will absorb 70% of any physical damage. Once it goes above 50, like say an enemy hits you for 60 damage, 10 of that damage will just pass straight through. It won't be covered by your arm. And then the remaining 50 will be reduced by 70%. So in that sense, there is kind of, I think, an interesting mechanic, but which is a little bit obscure to players, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So like, what part of the reason for that is that when we were doing this on Titan Quest, the feedback I got from like the THQ project manager and whatnot is that was too complicated for like casual players. As a result, we just kind of ended up hiding it. Mm-hmm. But so it exists there, I guess, for hardcore players to sort of find and figure out if they're so inclined. And I think it has kind of an interesting dynamic in terms of the way weapons work, or the way that you have to sort of protect yourself against certain enemies. Like, for example, one of the benefits of like two-handed weapons is because they have such high maximum damage, you have a much greater frequency of basically hitting over enemy armor, in which case whatever damage that's above their protection level is just passing straight through.
I have noticed something like that from just plain increase in gear on my Blade Master. When I just hit 35, it seems like I was doing pretty good damage, and then, up to the point where I'm at now, with like 4,000 DPS, you just like charge up them and they evaporate. And it doesn't seem like they're dying 4 times faster. It just seems like, it's an uncomparable difference. And that does make a lot of sense, knowing that mechanic now. So that's good. Yeah. And one more thing that I was kind of curious about, again, it's probably related to Titan Quest as well, is like AoE caps. Because in RPG games, it seems like people kind of spec into or build around primarily an AoE skill, and then they have a single target skill if the AoE one doesn't do enough single target damage. That just, is good enough to kill like bosses with or something like that. And I notice you guys have AoE caps, which I haven't seen in any other games that I've played at least. And how do you guys really tie this into the game? Why do you feel these caps are necessary? Like, for instance, I think like Blade Arc, I think is a cap of like 5 or something.
Yeah.
Why are these like not unlimited? And I'm just kind of curious why it's set up this way, so AoEs aren't necessarily king, but you can kind of use them because they're also kind of good enough for single target attacks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess part of it is like we don't necessarily want AoE to be king. Where I feel like they are in a lot of other games, and what you see is people generally just kind of spamming one skill over and over again. And I think that, at least to me, that seems less interesting than having to sort of rely on more of a variety of skills. There are some AoEs that aren't capped, like most of the spellcaster ones aren't, and the reason for that is that like those ones tend to not do any weapon damage, or they do very low weapon damage. So we're able to regulate their effectiveness more based on the flat damage that's tied to that skill. Whereas once you start bringing weapon damage into the mix, it becomes a lot harder to control, and I think that you could easily end up with very overpowered melee-oriented AoEs if there wasn't a cap, and you were just basically able to amass ridiculous DPS.
All right. Well, that kind of makes sense. I do know some of them don't have much weapon scaling. Like even the Nightblade ones, they have some weapon scaling, but it's pretty poor. And with the way that you described armor working, and probably because these attacks are subjected to armor, they probably don't do much unless they crit heavily, I would imagine. Now, another thing I was kind of wondering is, just, I guess to wrap this up, so I played through the game, I did all the quests, I explored every single inch of every map that I found, I killed everything, I did Grubworm or whatever the boss guy is. He died instantly too. But when you play the game and you get to this part that the town needs more food, and then you can't get past that part, is that the transition between Act 2 or 3, or is that just up to where Act 2 has been developed so far?
Yeah, that's basically the transition into Act 3. So probably, I think what we're going to do is, at some point we will probably open up a few of the other areas beyond that are basically done, but don't have any quests yet, and then that will help sort of advance people up to basically the gates of the next town, which is where you basically take on a bunch more main story quests, and then that kind of leads towards the end of Act 3.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have for today. Thanks so much for your time and explaining some of the mechanics, and some of the people who've never heard about the game, I'm sure they're a little bit more interested now. And I'm probably going to continue playing a little bit on the side. It is my go-to game for
cool.
now.
I understand it's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
It's not mainstream. Can't fully embrace it yet.
Yeah. But I am very excited for updates, and I hope you guys can get those out as soon as possible. So.
We're trying, man, and and I appreciate having a chance to chat with you and kind of explain more about the game. And if you have any feedback, feel free to pass it along to me.
Great, thanks so much. And if you guys enjoyed the chat, check out the game. There's some content out there. There's some videos, and I think what is it on Steam now? Like $20 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's like 24 right now.
Yeah, so I've spent more hours than that in the last week, so it's probably worth it. Okay. Thanks again.
Take care.